All right. Thank you for everybody that's on today. I will tell you that I feel very socially distanced from all of you. So I guess we're doing the right thing here. Okay. So welcome to Small Business Phoenix Rising. Get over here. Our crusade is to provide small business owners the tools, insights, and mentoring needed to get through this time and back to being successful and profitable. And if you just kind of nod for me, everybody can see my screen at this point. Is that right? Okay, great. All right. Awesome. So what we do here is we have tools, insights, and mentoring. And these are all things that we really need at this time, particularly with everything that's going on. So just a housekeeping thing. We're getting to the point where our group is really growing. We actually have technically about 40 people that have registered for this meeting. We'll see how many show up. But if you have questions during the presentations here, if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and jump into the chat and type them out. And then that way I'll go ahead and address those questions. So here's what we got going today. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give kind of what I think is my COVID-19 perspective as far as what's happening and how we should kind of put this into perspective. And then after I finish up, we're going to have John Lansbaum, and he's going to talk about his SBA loan experience. He's pretty much gone out there and applied for everything. And so he's got some really, really good information. So here we go with the perspective. We have a lot of car accidents that take place here in the United States. In fact, we have about 30,000 people that die annually from car accidents. And my question would be is what if we went ahead and lowered the speed limit to 20 miles an hour? If that happened, 99% of all the people that die from car accidents wouldn't die. And that's would be end up being about less than 200 people a year. And so my question is why don't we do that? Do we not care about those 30,000 people? And of course the answer is, of course we care. But collectively, as the human race is concerned here in the United States, we've made a conscious decision that we don't essentially want to live our lives in our cars when we travel from point A to point B. Because if we only went 20 miles an hour everywhere we went, it'd simply take us on a 45-minute drive that we would normally make, it'd take us 2 to 3 hours. And it would be pretty mind-numbing to us. So my point to this is that, and I'm trying not to make it a discussion of the merits as much as the reality of the situation that we're in, that one day we're going to wake up one morning and we're going to say 20 miles an hour is just not going to work anymore. And I think that's starting to happen right now. We're seeing a lot of our leaders, a lot of the social scientists basically saying, hey, we need to get to work. We've kind of mitigated this to some extent, but we need to start getting back to where things are. We're no longer going to hunker down in our homes. The social distancing will be a thing of the past. Specifically, my wife has about had it, and she is actually ready to start social distancing herself from me and getting a little bit more familiar with other people outside of the house. So one day we're going to collectively conclude this is enough, and we're going to move on. So, but let me make one point here, make very clear. I'm not calling for any kind of movement or any type of revolution here. It's just the reality is collectively, we're going to mitigate this. COVID-19 is going to be mitigated. The risk, we're going to know what it is, and we're going to move on. And as all risks, and I'll give you just one other example here, I spent a certain number of years living in southern Utah, and they have Zions National Park here, and this is Angel's Landing. And it's basically sits, I believe, at about 4,000 feet up in the air. And if you can see this gal right here, she's hanging onto a chain. And if she just scoots over about 2 feet there, you got about 2,000 foot drop. I've hiked that a couple times, except I cannot even make it to the top because about halfway there, my knees start shaking. I'm deathly scared of heights. It's just something that happened to me when I turned about 30. I started to realize I wasn't Superman anymore, and I wasn't indestructible. And somehow I just, if I go up escalators, I have to hunch down as I hold on both sides. It's just how it is. But my point to this is that there are a certain number of people that die each year as they hike up to Angel's Landing, yet we don't ban Angel's Landing, that the risk has been mitigated, that whether it's one person a year, two persons a year, we do have people die. In fact, my wife, her name is Holly, she actually had a cousin that fell off Angel's Landing and ended up dying. Very tragic, very sad, but at one point or another, everything gets mitigated as far as the risk is concerned. So when that happens, we will be back to 75 miles an hour instead of the 20 miles an hour that we're doing right now. So this will end. It will only be a small moment in our lives. And essentially, that is today's perspective. So with that being said, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker today. He's going to talk about SBA loans. He's actually applied for quite a few of them. He was very, very early into getting into the process. So he's got some really good information for us. This person is John Lambsbaum. And I've known John for a couple of years. He's a very, very good businessman. He has a remodeling business, and he is always on top of what needs to happen in his business, particularly with his customers and making sure that they're happy. And any business that does that, I just have tremendous amount of respect for. So with that being said, John, the floor is yours. Let me go ahead and get in here and find you and unmute you. There you are.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so thanks, Andy, for that introduction. Holy crud, I didn't know that. I'm going to have to leave now because my head's so big. So I am by no means an expert in SBA or PPP or the CARES Act or anything else. So I just want to start by saying that. However, at the same time, we have had quite a bit of experience with actually making the applications and everything else. So the CARES Act, or it appears is going to be CARES Act Part 1, passed Congress about a week and a half ago. And what that did was, if you're making under $75,000, you're going to get a $1,200 infusion into your bank account. However, there's a whole lot of issues with that because there's no real application, and there's no real way that the government has decided how that's going to work. So my viewpoint on all of these things is they say it's going to happen right now. Take whatever right now is, multiply it by 2.5, and that's probably what we're looking at. So, as far as getting immediate help or immediate money, it will happen. It's just your definition of immediate needs to be tempered a little bit. So the CARES Act actually carved out small business loans through the SBA, through the EIDL, which I'm not even going to attempt to tell you what that stands for, as well as PPP, which is payroll protection. EIDL can be applied for through the SBA website, and the SBA will take your application. It's not overly complicated. I think our EIDL application took almost 10 minutes, and they send you an email that says, we've received your application and we will review it and we will get back with you. Unfortunately, they don't tell you how to follow up on it, and they don't tell you when it will be followed up on. So not quite sure what's happening there, which is, again, this is our experience. So that has been kind of put on the sideline for right now. The other infusion of cash is through the PPP, and that's the Paycheck Protection Program. So there's been a lot of things going on around it. If you've read anything in the news, there's all sorts of information. There was an article in yesterday's USA Today about how frustrating it is, because you got to figure out first, where can you apply? So figuring out where you can apply is step one. You cannot apply directly through the SBA website because the SBA, through the CARES Act, has enlisted banks to actually spread out the funds, which is supposed to make it faster and more effective, as well as from a higher up oversight standing. The bank will actually do the oversight and ensure that you actually qualify for the loan, those types of things. However, the government changed the rules on several occasions over the last week leading up to when it would be available to be able to actually apply. So we were very fortunate in that we have a good relationship with Bank of America. And Bank of America put a stipulation on that said you have to have a business account, but you also have to have a business lending account. So we have a line of credit with BOA, which allowed us in. So we actually applied before 9:30 a.m. this past Friday. However, that was not, we thought that was going to be the end of the story and we'd have our money. What we got 2 days ago was an email from Bank of America requesting additional information. The additional information is where it got really confusing because they were asking for tax forms on things that we didn't necessarily, we've not filed our taxes for 2019. So we don't necessarily have all the tax forms for it. The other thing that they asked for were payroll tax forms. I believe it's the quarterly 941, and that isn't going to be filed for first quarter of 2019. Now, if your business existed in 2018, they also ask for 941s from last year as well. So it appears that in talking with our banker and our accountant, they're going to be using your quarterly tax forms as a way to audit what you've asked for or requested versus what you're actually eligible for. So that's been our experience thus far. The PPP, getting it applied for was actually about 15 minutes through the BOA website. So BOA, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank are the larger banks, but there are also smaller banks in your local market. It might be Fifth Third, it might be Guarantee Bank or Regional Bank, could be any bank, but they all should be able to help you. There are also, we've found, individual localized funding sources that will make the application on your behalf. And what it appears they attempt to do is get all your information and then apply for an SBA for you as well. So don't know exactly how that works, but as with anything else having to do with money, there are plenty of scammers out there. So just be protective of your personal information and your business information, as well as your banking information, because somebody might be out there trying to grab that so that they can do something that might be considered below board. So that's been our experience thus far.
Great, great. So John, questions here. Okay. I've got John Stacy. Amergy was later, but requested the 2019 940, 941 proof in insurance payments and how you calculated the request. So is that a question, John Stacy?
That's been an interesting part, John, in that all of the banks have their own internal folks that are trying to keep them compliant with this whole thing. And each one is kind of looking at this in a little different perspective. I've talked to, obviously, BOA, but we also have a banking relationship with a different bank, and we talked to them, and their process was a little bit different. So
Okay, so Craig is saying there's significant changes to interest rates and terms, 3.75 to 1% from 10 years down to 2. Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, this whole situation is so fluid, and every day there's something that's changing.
There's another thing to consider, and that being CARES Act came out, what, 10 days ago? It appears, according to Citibank, I was reading something online, Citibank is claiming that they've already taken enough applications that if they fulfilled every application for SBA as well as PPP, that just through Citibank, they're at almost a third of the total, which is $350 billion that's being offered. So the article went further to state that the government is already talking about an additional stipend, which will almost double that original $350 billion without approaching what they're starting to call CARES Act number 2. So apparently there's going to be a second CARES Act. And a couple of the things that I've been reading about that separate the CARES Act 2 versus CARES Act 1 is they're going to change the way that CARES Act 2 handles small business versus larger business. So the original $350 billion was supposed to help small business, but the definition of small business was 500 or fewer employees. Well, a 500 employee business it is a fairly large business compared to mine with my 3 employees. And we're being put into the same pool as that 500 employee business. The other thing that's happening is there's a lot of companies that have the way that they've set the company up from a logistics standpoint. They've taken let's say, there's a hotelier and they have 500 hotel locations. None of those locations have more than 150 or 200 employees. But the way that they've set it up is each of those hotels is an individual business, and ultimately they roll up into the larger corporation. Those hotel corporations are applying for the same funds that we're applying for. So that also is being defined within CARES 2. But that's one of the other things that is taking into account or slowing things down. And what John said, SBA is not built for speed, no, not by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
So the way that we're looking at it is, at some point the money will come, or it won't. But it's almost getting in line at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the real key, and the real takeaway is get the process started. Get your numbers put together. If you don't have all of your 2019 taxes submitted, and I don't either because we have this extension out till July right now, but I have gone through and I have done all the P&L on it, and that's the stuff that the bank's going to need to be able to essentially approve you. So that all that stuff needs to be done, and you need to get in line, or otherwise there is no chance to all this. All right. Any other questions? I've got one, John. So what do you do if you don't, and this is my situation right now, I don't necessarily have a bank that's doing the PPP right now. In fact, and I'm not going to mention this other bank, but it's a local bank, it's a community bank, and they would be really good to help me, but I don't have my main business account's not with them, and they know that. And they told me that they're not going to help me because my main business account is not with them. So what do you do if you don't have a bank that's going to help you with the PPP?
So unfortunately, that's where you can go to, well, not unfortunate, that's an unfortunate situation. You could go to one of these independent funding sources that will apply on your behalf, or you can shop banks. I mean, I hate to say that, and it's really a pain in the neck to do right now. Plus, getting a hold of a banker somewhere can be very difficult because they're very busy trying to field phone calls from people like us who are doing exactly what you're talking about. The most important thing that I can tell you is diligence. Just stay on it. It is available. It's not a perfect system. Unfortunately, we've all heard the old joke, "Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." That's pretty much where we are right now.
Yeah.
Now, one other thing, Andy, and this is, well, this was new to me earlier this week. The federal government, through unemployment, has put into effect a $600 per week stipend. And you qualify for it, if I understood the information correctly, you qualify as a small business owner, a 1099 contractor, or an independent contractor. You can qualify that for that unemployment if your hours have been cut by X percent, and I want to say it's by 50%, or your income has been reduced by 20%. So there is a possibility, and you'll need to take a look, but there is a possibility that you can apply for unemployment as a small business owner or as a independent contractor. That was one of the other things that was very, very confusing with the original application for the PPP, because they've changed about 3 different times, even after the government put all the final forms into place, how to handle an independent contractor at 1099 as part of my payroll, because we do have independent contractors. So at one point it was that could be included in my PPP, and then it became that it's not. So the independent contractor is supposed to apply on their own. However, they cannot, as a 1099, apply for the PPP as an independent until April the 10th, which is 2 days from now.
Okay, great. Mike Mogale, do you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Well, actually, I have a point to make. A lot of times your merchant service company does lending, and I checked with mine, and they have an opportunity through the merchant service to apply for that for you. So if you have a merchant service account and your bank's not able to do that, you might call your merchant, whoever you're processing with. They may be able to help you with that process of funding.
Okay, great, thanks. And then Craig, you had something too. Go ahead, Craig. Craig, you with us?
Yeah, sorry, technical problems with trying to get it. I was just looking for the site on the irs.gov, but to get the stimulus money, they had, if you hadn't, there's some issues with, I was looking at it now, that if you haven't filed your 2019 taxes, but you filed your 2018, they should have all the information that you need. There was some miscommunication earlier, late last week about there was a way to sign up with irs.gov if you already hadn't done a payment plan or paid taxes or something like that. So they had your direct deposit information. That's what they need in order to get the money to you quickly. So I was looking for that link. If I find it, I'll shoot it over to you, Andy.
Okay.
I put a link up there. I'm doing a lot of my restaurant clients are talking a lot about this PPP plan, and they're not very happy. The Federalist link that I gave you walks through a couple of examples that unless you're really, because of the whole point of PPP is to keep your employees employed while you're going through this whole process of coronavirus. But with the payment plan being shortened to 2 years, you really want to run your numbers really well to make sure that you really want to accept that money. Also want to make sure that you're going to meet that 75% of it has to go towards payroll for employees, because you won't be eligible for forgiveness. I also have a lot of information that I'm getting on the mortgage side from some of my folks, and they're saying that be very careful with forbearance on mortgage, because that'll come to add, in some cases, thousands of dollars immediately and in the back end of your loan. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out. If you want more information, I'll try to pull my links together for you on that. And again, I'm not a tax advisor or any of that as well. So
Wait,
I'm just pulling stuff. SBA does have a lot of, on their website has teleconferences about 4 times or 5 times a day, if you want to hop onto one of those to help you with the SBA loan process, or the process for the EIDL and the PPP.
Just know
Right.
that the link for the for the teleconference, or they do have some video conferencing too, works a whole lot better than the actual link for signing up. You've got to be really patient because it's still bogged down and slow.
Yeah, I think the reality is this is going to be a long game to all this. And as things get released from the government, and one particular thing that I want to really kind of just notate that John really brought up, and I think he did a really good job on, is that the government is starting to understand that not all businesses are alike. And John and I were actually talking about this yesterday. Primarily with my business, I don't really have employees, but I have people that have worked for me like 10 years. My graphic designer has worked for me for 10 years. He's 1099. I don't need him as an employee. All my people are essentially 1099. I have really good relationships with them. They're almost like employees, except I don't treat them like employees. I don't tell them exactly what to do. I just give them the work and say, please complete it. And so that is quite a bit different business model, of course, from a hotel, from a restaurant per se. And certainly if you have a CPA firm where your people have to be employees, very, very different. So the government is starting to understand that, because some of the problems that they're having is that when they established the 75-25% rule, meaning that if 75% of the money that you get from the PPP is spent, and this is the way I understand it, is spent on your employees and keeping them around, and then 25% is on rent and these other expenses, that loan is actually forgiven. Well, the problem with that is that doesn't even come close to applying per se to a hotel. Hotel may have, a staff of 5-7 people. Your cost is in that building. Your cost is in the utilities. I mean, there's so much more. It's just a different dynamic. So the government's going to have to, as they've started to delineate the differences between businesses, because there is no cookie cutter to this. Every business, more specifically, industries are far different than another industry. So. Any other questions? Let's see here. All right, we can kind of bring this to a close. Do we have any other questions? If you actually want to speak, just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll unmute you. But we don't. All right. So, John, thank you. It was some great information. If any of you have questions for John, you can reach him at john@remodelingnerd.com. And he'd be more than happy to help you out. I mean, once again, and I don't think we can say this enough, we truly are at a point where we're all in this together, and hopefully we can all collectively kind of, boost ourselves out of it. So our next meeting is scheduled for April 14th. That is Tuesday next week. We will have another guest speaker, and we'll have some more information as the government gives it to us. And we appreciate it. Thank you for coming. And we appreciate all the insights. Thank you.